Here's something I've always wondered. Could this plane that's about to land on this runway in the hit 2013 video game Grand Theft Auto 5 actually land on that runway? This plane is a Boeing 747-8, or at least it's a knockoff of the Boeing 747-8, and it is both the largest variant of the 747 and one of the biggest planes in regular service today. Now, this plane needs a bare minimum of 6,000 feet in order to come to a stop under normal circumstances, so we need the runway in GTA5 to be 6,000 feet long. So, how do we figure out the length of a runway in a video game? You see these two big white bars here? In real life, those white bars are colloquially referred to as the 1,000-footers because they're always exactly 1,000 feet from the beginning of the runway, which means we can use that distance as a measuring stick to measure the rest of the runway. And if you do that, you'll see that you can fit roughly 6.5 of these 1,000-foot segments along the runway here, meaning that the total length of the runway is 6,500 feet. This is definitely on the shorter end for a normal 747 landing, but it's absolutely doable and totally realistic. Nice job, everyone. We figured it out. Except, none of that is actually correct. You see, a Boeing 747-8 is a 250-foot long airplane. You want to tell me how this distance is supposed to be 1,000 feet when a 250-foot airplane can't even fit into it twice over? Something's not adding up here, and I'm going to figure it out. Because if a Boeing 747 can't actually land here at the airport, where could it land? Is there anywhere in GTA 5 that would be a safe landing spot for a 747? Maybe like a big field somewhere? In order to actually answer these questions, we need to figure out how long the runway actually is. And thankfully, the game does give us a pretty easy way to do this. Because it turns out that if you place a marker on the minimap, the game will just tell you the exact distance between you and the marker. So if I stand on one end of the runway and I place the marker on the other end, we can see that this runway is approximately 3,000 feet long end to end, which is a 50% reduction from our initial estimate using the 1,000-foot markers. This also means that those 1,000-foot markers are really more like 500-foot markers in the GTA universe, and that in general, the scale of this runway is about 50% the scale of a normal runway. As you might have gathered, 3,000 feet is probably not enough space to land a Boeing 747-8 safely. But just to be sure, I cold DM'd one of my favorite YouTubers and actual 747 pilot, Kelsey, from the channel 74 Gear, to ask him if a Boeing 747 could land in 3,000 feet, and Kelsey said, this is a direct quote, "No." And yes, he did not capitalize it. Pilots they're very efficient people. Now, to be fair, he did actually say that if the plane was totally empty, no passengers, no cargo, no fuel, a sufficiently skilled pilot might be able to stop in that distance, but a case like that would be extremely rare and it would likely damage the aircraft. And unfortunately for Rockstar Games, it's actually even worse than this, because even though the length of the pavement from end to end is 3,000 feet, planes are only actually allowed to land in the area between the runway thresholds. If you account for that, then the actual usable length of the runway is closer to 2,500 feet. I'm not going to even bother asking Kelsey for a consult on that one. Now, the reason I know all of this is because I actually fly planes myself. Not 747s, you know, little rinky-dink planes, but still. And if you learn to fly planes, even little planes, they teach you all about these runway markings and these measurements and things like that. One of the things about learning to fly planes is that it's really expensive. And the only reason I was able to, sorry about this, and the only reason I was able to afford it was because of our beloved sponsor today, Rocket Money. Now, technically that's a lie. I didn't actually know about Rocket Money at the time. I was using another less good budgeting app, but the fundamental point still stands. Budgeting helped me reach for my dreams, and Rocket Money is the best budgeting app you can get. Frankly, I probably would have gotten my license sooner if I'd known about Rocket Money, because one of the things that separates it from other budgeting apps is its wide variety of really good tools for staying disciplined about what you can spend versus what you have to save. And it does a better job than most of those apps at keeping you informed about bad habits or sort of trends that you're forming with your spending. Rocket Money can also search through your transactions and give you a readable list of all your subscriptions so that you can decide if you need to cancel any of them. And if you do, they can cancel most of those subscriptions from right within the app, which is extremely convenient. Yes, obviously, all of this stuff is stuff that you can do on your own with some patience and a spreadsheet. The point of Rocket Money is to make it faster and easier and hold you better accountable so that it's more effective. Effective budgeting is a very good thing. Sorry for being your dad, but anyway, you don't have money until you have a budget, and you don't have a budget until you have Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/AnyAustin to get started for free. We love budgeting. We love Rocket Money. Anyway, back to planes. So, our Boeing 747-8 definitely could not land on this runway. And, just to be absolutely clear, on top of that, watch this footage. The in-game 747 landing here, the plane in the game doesn't even use the whole runway. It lands here, and then it's fully stopped and taxiing by here. If you measure that distance, it turns out to be roughly 1,200 feet. Landing a 747 in 1,200 feet of runway would be the equivalent of me landing this plane, the Cessna 172, in about 100 feet of runway. Not gonna happen. If you absolutely had to land a 747 at Los Santos International Airport, here's what I'd recommend. Aim to land here on runway 21 and touch down in the taxiing area before the runway. This is technically illegal, but it's an emergency, so I guess first declare an emergency and then do this. Roll it all the way out, past the end of the runway and into the lights on the other end. They'll probably ruin the plane, but they might slow you down enough that you can crash into the sea reasonably intact, and you could probably save some portion of the souls on board. Now, there are two other airports in GTA 5, but both of them have runways of similar length. Sandy Shores Airstrip is about 2,800 feet long, and Fort Zancudo, which is a military base, has a runway that's about 3,100 feet long. In some ways, the airstrip at Sandy Shores isn't a terrible option because there are fewer obstructions around, like buildings and fences and things, so you could run it off one end of the runway and have a little more space to come to a stop, but the trade-off would be that a small non-towered airport like this may not have airport firefighting services, which you would probably want on account of you're probably going to burst into flames, and the shorter runway obviously means you're going to carry more energy crashing into the desert. Funnily enough, this means that literally none of the airports in GTA 5 are actually set up for having this type of plane land there. But if none of the airports are good options, I guess the next question is there anywhere in Grand Theft Auto 5 that is long and flat enough to land a Boeing 747? Let's take a look. It's pretty tough. The game does a really good job of feeling like this vast space with tons of wide open areas, and when you're playing it on foot, it can feel like it takes ages to get from one end to the other. But compared to real life, GTA 5 is actually very small. The entirety of the map is actually smaller than the Denver airport, which both makes GTA 5 seem kind of small, but also somehow makes the Denver airport seem huge, which, to be fair, it is. It is effectively the largest airport in the world, so, fair enough. Also, I don't want to hear from anybody about how the King Fahd airport in Saudi Arabia is bigger than Denver. It's not. That airport is like 70% sand. Go look at it. The other issue is that there's also just a lot of stuff in GTA 5, rocks and signs and cars and buildings and trees, all of which present a big problem for a jumbo jet trying to land. Now, you've got some stretches of highway that are sort of promising, but most of them aren't actually much longer than the airport runways anyway, and then there's a good chance that some of the signage on them would absolutely demolish the wings of a plane, which is bad because plane wings are full of jet fuel. Fun fact. Airplane gas is stored in the wings. Another place I considered was this beach on the western coast. I think it's called Vespucci Beach, which is a terrible option, but maybe slightly less terrible than the highway because while it's also not much longer than the airport runway, it is made of sand, which I feel like would help you come to a stop sooner, or maybe it would just mean that the landing gear would get stuck, break off, and then the whole fuselage would crash into a fireball. Could go either way. We do land planes on beaches sometimes. I say we, not me, but human beings. And it turns out there's actually an airport in Scotland that is also a public beach where the planes land when the tide goes out. But that airport is pretty limited to certain types or sizes of planes because heavier planes or planes with thinner tires will sink into the sand and flip over. And flipping your plane upside down is a lot more survivable in a Piper Cub than in a jumbo jet. And that's about it for potential landing areas. There's really not much. So if you happen to find yourself at the controls of a Boeing 747 flying over the beautiful land of Grand Theft Auto 5, what should you do? Just give up? Just aim for the least populated area and nose down? Now, this is another question that I posed to Kelsey, the 747 pilot, and I'll tell you what he says in a moment. But first, here's my personal opinion as a non-professional gamer. As far as I'm concerned, you've got two options, really. You can try for the runway at the airport and understand that you'll probably die impacting terrain while potentially saving those in the back of the plane, or go for the water. Now, full disclosure, water landings are really dangerous for large aircraft, but as many of us probably remember, one guy did do it. Captain Sully Tom Hanks Sullenberger landed an Airbus A320 on the Hudson River in 2009, and every single person on board survived. Prior to that, pilots were generally never made to practice water landings because it was assumed that a large modern airliner landing in the water was effectively unsurvivable, or at least that there was no amount of training that would have an effect on the latent survivability of it. That's still probably probably mostly true, but in addition to the miracle on the Hudson, there are a couple of other times when at least a portion of the occupants survived a water landing in a large aircraft. In 1996, a Boeing 767, which is a very big plane, not quite 747 big, but it's pretty close. This Boeing 767 was commandeered by some not so good folks, and these folks did not have everyone's best interest at heart. So when they eventually ran out of fuel and they weren't near an airport, they tried to land it on the water, and then one of the engines got caught in the water, causing the whole thing to flip over and violently break apart. Despite the suboptimal execution of the ditching, though, 50 of the 175 passengers actually ended up surviving. And then the other time I found was in 1956, when Pan Am Flight 6 ditched into the Pacific Ocean just after sunrise, and despite the fact that the tail section of the plane broke off in the event, 100% of the human passengers survived with only minor injuries. It's worth noting that the plane in this case was an old Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, which has a landing speed as low as 120 miles an hour, whereas modern planes like the 747 need to land at closer to 180 miles an hour or higher, which does make a big difference, obviously. So if I had to pick a water landing spot in GTA 5, where am I going with? I think I would take the Alamo Sea here in the center of the map. It's long, there's probably fewer waves than on the ocean, and it's a reasonable distance from land in order for help to come and, get save people, pull them out of the water. But it turns out that actual 747 pilots might not agree with the opinion of a gamer, because when I asked Kelsey whether he'd rather land in the water or on the beach or on a short runway, he said this, quote, "Runway every time." Now, part of his reasoning was that airports often have equipment on hand to assist with emergencies, including some airports that actually have a special section at the end of runways that airplanes can kind of get stuck in if they overshoot it. It helps them come to a stop. That system is called the EMAS. What's that stand for? Engineering Materials Arresting System. And then he went on to clarify that even between water and a beach, he would choose the beach, not the water. Quote, "If the beach sand was completely smooth and level, you'd probably touch down okay, but it depends on the type of sand. I would take the rough beach over the smooth water because you may end up unconscious, but you won't drown, and then others can have more time to get off." So my choice was the worst choice. Regardless, the underlying point is this. GTA 5 can't handle this plane. If you're on a 747 headed to Los Santos, just say your prayers. You're knocking on heaven's door. RIP. In fact, at this point, I'm not even sure that any of the planes in this game would normally be landing on a runway of this size. Let's go down the list and find out. The smallest plane here at the airport is a knockoff Cessna 172, which is the only plane here that I have personal experience with. Now, this plane can land in as little as about 600 feet depending, so a 2,500 foot runway would be no problem. Next up, we have these two planes, which look like knockoffs of the Pilatus PC-12 and the Piper PA-31. Both of those planes have minimum conservative landing distances of about 2,000 feet, so the 2,500 foot runway in GTA 5 would be just fine. But you can see we're already getting pretty close to the edge here, and we're just talking, this is still just propeller planes. If we move up to business jets, like this one based on the Learjet 45, this is where it starts to get a little tricky. Obviously, landing distance numbers aren't set in stone, and they depend on a ton of factors like weight and air temperature and the condition of the runway, but on average, a jet like this needs about 4,000 feet of runway to brake safely. Is there a world where in an emergency one of these jets could land here and really slam on their brakes to stop before hitting anything? Maybe, probably, but probably not something you'd want to do regularly. I don't know, maybe one of you is a business jet person and you can correct me on that. And then we get into our full-size jets like this 737 knockoff, which unless they've got nobody on board, probably don't stand a chance here. The shortest runway I could find in the world that regularly takes 737 landings is this one in Rio, which is about 4,400 feet long, but that's definitely unusual. I mean, you can see in this footage how the plane, it uses the entire runway just to come to a stop, and I assume that's with max braking. So what this all means is that the airport in Grand Theft Auto 5 is a lot smaller than your average major airport in real life. How much smaller exactly? Let me show you a comparison between Los Santos International from GTA 5 and the real-life Los Angeles International, which it's based off of. This is going to be adjusted for scale, okay? You ready? Here's Los Santos International, and here's, drumroll please, Los Angeles International. This really puts into perspective how, the level of work that it takes for a developer like Rockstar to create a world with such a great sense of scale, despite the fact that it's basically a tiny toy version of reality. And I would encourage you, next time you're flying in a plane, really take a look outside and notice just how fucking gigantic the runways actually are. It takes a lot of space to land a plane. I'm actually going to be flying into LAX next month for VidCon, so when I get there, I'll try to remember to take some pictures for you. Yes, I'm finally going to VidCon. If you look east of Los Angeles Angeles International Airport, you can find this tiny airport called Fullerton Municipal. The runway here is 3,121 feet long, making it a much closer comparison to GTA 5. And notice how if you zoom in, the only aircraft you see here are tiny propeller planes, because those are the only planes that can actually take off and land on a runway this short. Also, notice how the runway here does not have any 1,000-foot markers like we talked about, both because the runway is so short that they would just be weirdly close together, but also because those markings are really made for airline pilots to use, and they aren't generally necessary for what we would call general aviation. I guess the last question we should consider is this. Let's say we wanted an airport in Grand Theft Auto 5 that was adequately sized to handle the traffic that's actually flying in and out of it. How big would that airport have to be? Well, here's how big the airport in GTA 5 is normally, and now here is how big it would have to be. Yes, huge, like annoyingly huge. Basically, half the map would be an airport. Now, before you go getting mad at me for forcing Rockstar to delay GTA 6 again so that they can add more realistic runways, Rockstar, it's me, Annie Austin. Don't do it. Your runways are great and they work just fine. Nobody wants a game where half the map is just an accurately sized airport. Gamers say that they want ultra realism, but they don't. Don't listen to them. I'm telling you, your runways are fine. Your airport signage, on the other hand, could use a little work. Just kidding, I don't care. I mean, I'm not kidding, it does have a lot of mistakes, but you know, if I thought my audience cared enough about planes, I would make a whole video going into Grand Theft Auto airport design, but I think that would probably be overplaying my hand slightly. Shout out to Kelsey from the channel 74Gear for his assistance with those 747 questions. There's a link to his channel down below if you want more aviation content to watch. In the meantime, I'm Annie Austin. Thanks for watching.